You had a fever last Tuesday. 101. You made dinner, helped your kid pack for practice, answered 3 work emails from the kitchen counter, unloaded the groceries, and went to bed without mentioning it to anyone. Your wife asked why you were quiet. You said you were just tired. That wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. And here's the thing. You weren't being tough. You weren't trying to be a hero. It genuinely did not occur to you to say, "I don't feel well. Can someone else handle tonight?" That sentence has never once formed naturally in your mouth. Not because you chose not to say it, because your brain doesn't generate it. Asking for help isn't a rejected option. It isn't even on the menu. I notice patterns. That's what I do. And this specific pattern of not asking for help, shows up in Gen X with a consistency that's almost unsettling. Not in a "we're all rugged individualists" kind of way, in a much quieter, much more interesting way. Because when you dig into why, what you find isn't pride, it isn't stubbornness, it's something your nervous system decided for you a long time ago, when you were way too young to have a vote. Let's talk about what actually happened. It's 1983. You're somewhere between 8 and 12. You come home from school and the house is empty. Not in a scary way, in the way it's always empty. You've got a key around your neck on a shoelace that's starting to fray because you chew on it when you're bored, which is often. You let yourself in. The door sticks a little at the bottom because nobody fixed it and nobody's going to. You drop your backpack on the floor. You go to the kitchen. There's a note on the counter. Maybe it says, "Dinner in fridge." Maybe it says, "Back by 6." Maybe there's no note at all, and you already know the drill. You open the fridge. There's half a casserole from 2 nights ago with the foil pushed back where somebody already picked at it. You heat it up yourself, because the microwave is right there, and you've been using it since you were 7. And here's the thing about that afternoon that nobody ever talks about. Nothing bad happened. You weren't traumatized. You weren't scared. You just handled it, like you handled every afternoon. You did your homework, or you didn't. You turned on the TV, all 4 channels, and 2 of them were static, and 1 was a soap opera your mom watched, but the story made no sense from the middle, so you watched whatever was left. You let the dog out. You let the dog back in. You ate something. You existed, alone, competently. At an age when kids today have a GPS tracker on their wrist and a parent on the phone. And that was just Tuesday. Now let me put some numbers around that Tuesday, because the numbers change the story. The U.S. divorce rate peaked in 1980. Data from the National Center for Family and Marriage Research puts it at 22.6 divorces per 1,000 married women, the highest in American history. If you were born in 1970, you were 10. If you were born in 1975, you were 5. Roughly half of the children born to married parents in the 1970s watched their parents' marriage end. That's not a statistic about a generation. That's a coin flip about your childhood. At the same time, maternal workforce participation was surging, and after-school childcare infrastructure basically didn't exist. Estimates from the Department of Justice suggest as many as 10 million American children were caring for themselves during non-school hours. A 2004 study by the research firm Reach Advisors described Gen X as one of the least parented, least nurtured generations in U.S. history. That's not an opinion. That's a data point. So here you are. You're 8, 9, 10 years old, and you learn something that most people learn much later in life, or never learn at all. You learn that when something goes wrong, nobody is coming. Not because nobody loves you, not because you're not worth helping, but because the people who would help you are at work, or dealing with a divorce, or managing their own crisis that nobody talks about at dinner. And your brain, your very smart, very adaptive brain, does something with that information. It doesn't file it away as a sad memory. It builds infrastructure around it. It rewires. There's a term for this. John Bowlby, the psychologist who essentially invented attachment theory, called it compulsive self-reliance. It's a pattern that develops in children who learn, through repetition, that expressing needs doesn't result in those needs being met. So the brain does what brains do. It adapts. It stops generating the signal. Not the need, the signal. You still need help. You still need support. but the part of your operating system that would normally flag that need and send you toward another person, it gets quieter and quieter until it basically goes silent. And here's where it gets really interesting. This isn't a personality trait. It's not, "I'm just independent." It's a neurological adaptation to an environment where independence was the only viable strategy. Your brain looked at the data. Help requested, help not received. Help requested, help not received. And it did the rational thing. It stopped requesting. The APA's Stress in America survey has tracked generational stress levels since 2007. In 2012, Gen Xers reported an average stress level of 5.4 on a 10-point scale, tied with millennials for the highest of any generation measured. But here's the detail most people skip past. The survey also measured the gap between actual stress and what each generation considered a healthy stress level. Gen X had the biggest gap, 1.6 points. Not the most stress, the most distance between how stressed they were and how stressed they thought they should be. They knew something was wrong. They just weren't doing anything about it, and the numbers haven't moved. In 2021, 22% of Gen Xers reported struggling with stress daily, still the highest of any generation measured. And the therapy numbers tell the rest of the story. The APA found that in 2018, only 26% of Gen Xers had received help from a mental health professional. Compare that to 37% of Gen Z. That's not because Gen X is healthier. It's because Gen X grew up in a time when therapy was for people who'd been through what clinicians now call big T trauma: war, assault, catastrophe. Seeing a therapist because your parents' marriage fell apart and you spent 4 hours a day alone at age 9, that wasn't on the menu. That was just childhood. If you spend any time in Gen X online spaces, you'll see this pattern described over and over. One post that went semi-viral captured it in 4 words: "Because nobody ever came." That was someone's answer to why they never ask for help. Not a manifesto, not a therapy breakthrough, just 4 words that apparently hit a nerve so deep it traveled through an entire generation's comment section. And the replies were all the same flavor. Not angry, not self-pitying, just recognizing. "Oh, that's why I do that. I literally never connected those 2 things before. I thought it was just me." It wasn't just you. But here's where I want to be careful, because this is the part where the story could go 2 ways and both of them are true at the same time. One direction is the positive reframe, and it's real. You took a childhood that gave you minimal support, and you built a remarkable level of competence from it. A disproportionate number of Gen Xers ended up building things on their own: businesses, side hustles, solutions nobody asked them to create. You're the generation that adapted to every technological shift from rotary phones to smartphones without a single training seminar. You figured out credit cards and mortgages and health insurance with 0 financial literacy education because your parents didn't do that part either. That's not nothing. That's a genuine, hard-won skill set that younger generations are actively trying to develop through courses and coaching and self-help books. You got it the hard way, but you got it. The other direction is harder to say, but it matters. That same wiring, the compulsive self-reliance, the silent signal, it's still running. And the environment has changed, but the program hasn't updated. You're not 8 anymore. You're in your late 40s, your 50s. You're dealing with aging parents, difficult teenagers, career plateaus, health things you haven't told anyone about. The stakes are higher than a broken bike chain and an empty house, and your nervous system is still running the same protocol. Handle it. Don't signal. Handle it. Don't signal. I'm not going to tell you to go to therapy. I can already feel half of you tensing up at the word. And I'm definitely not going to use the phrase self-care because I can see you rolling your eyes from here, and honestly, you'd be right to. What I will say is this: that wiring was a smart adaptation. It worked. It kept you functional in an environment that didn't have a better option for you. But an adaptation that was built for a house with no adults in it might not be the right adaptation for a life that actually has people in it who would show up if you let them. The reflex to handle everything alone isn't strength. It's not weakness either. It's a program that was written by an 8-year-old
who was doing the best they could with the information they had. The question isn't whether it served you. It did. The question is whether it's still serving you now, or whether it's just running on automatic because nobody ever told it the situation changed.
That kid who came home to an empty house and heated up the casserole and did the homework and let the dog out and went to bed without anybody asking how their day was, that kid was not broken. That kid was resourceful and tough and quietly brilliant at surviving. But that kid also learned something that day, and the day after, and the day after that. They learned that wanting help and getting help are two different things, and the distance between them is a distance you cross alone. You're not that kid anymore, but I think, for a lot of you, that kid is still the one answering the door when somebody offers to help, still saying, "I'm fine," still meaning it, sort of, still heating up the casserole, still letting the dog out, still handling it. If any of this sounds familiar, I'd love to hear about it. Was there a specific moment growing up, a specific afternoon, a specific situation, where you realized nobody was coming and you just handled it yourself? Not because you wanted to, but because the alternative never occurred to you. Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe. Next week, we're looking at why Gen X goes completely silent when they're hurt, and what that silence is actually protecting.